Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to cultivate a more present, authentic life, then do we have the show for you. Today I'll be talking with Tami Simon, the founder of Sounds True, a multimedia spiritual publishing company with New York Times best-selling authors including Eckhart Tolle, Brach, and Brene Brown. She is also the host of the weekly podcast called Insights at the Edge. Sounds True is also the creator of a brand new mindfulness meditation teacher certification program. And that's just what I want to talk with her about today, about how to live a more present, authentic, meaningful life by bringing mindfulness into all that we do. That, plus we'll talk about a bow of the boat, a love bottom line, 200 tries to make a French bread, why you want to be a feedback junkie, a return from India, 90 pounds and silent, and what in the world a spoodle named Raspberry has to do with anything. Gotcha. So welcome to the show, Tammy. Are you ready to shine?
Indeed. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here and a mighty woohoo! So before we dive into the mindful side of things, would you mind taking us back in time? What were you like in your earliest years?
Sure. I was a little bit, depressive might be strong, but deeply existentially tortured, I think would be accurate.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a very reflective person, and there were issues that bothered me. The gap between the rich and the poor, the threat of nuclear war. I could go on and on. My parents used to say at the dinner table, we're not going to talk about that at dinner, Tammy. And I was like, when are we going to talk about it? When is the right time to talk about these things? And I was drawn to philosophy and went to Swarthmore College thinking I would be a philosophy major, but soon discovered that the type of inquiry I was interested in was more welcome in the religious studies department, which is where I landed as a sophomore. And I started studying Buddhism there. There was a professor, 1 year was he at Swarthmore College on a Fulbright scholarship teaching Buddhism and existentialism. And I fell in love at that time with the practice of meditation. And at the end of my sophomore year, I left college. I went to India, Sri Lanka, and Nepal in order to throw myself deeply into meditative practice. So that's really where I think my life, my true life, my adult life began, was in the discovery of meditation.
Had there been much of a spiritual practice or a spiritual bend at home? I realize you were asking questions like, where do we go when we die?
Sure. Well, I was raised by a liberal Jewish family, but interestingly, neither my mother nor my father particularly believed in God. And I remember going to temple with my family. We went very often on Friday nights. My father usually went to sleep, which I understood. It had been a hard week at work, and I kind of grabbed onto his arm and put my head next to his shoulder. It was really sweet. And my mom sang the songs. But whenever I asked any questions about what the experience of going to temple meant, they gave me answers as cultural Jews. It's important that we're part of a community. These values are important. God's a myth. God let us down during the Holocaust. There is no God, but we're cultural Jews. Get a good education, be a good person, give back to the world, be a person of service, be a mensch, which means take the trash out basically all the time before anybody else does, and help other people, and you're on the right track. But that answer and their view was not sufficient for me. I knew there was something inside me, and it was filled with a sense of awe and wonder and deep faith, actually, that was touched by what was happening in the temple service. And at the same time, I couldn't connect to reading prayers out of a prayer book. I knew that whatever was going to be personally meaningful to me wasn't going to come from someone else's prayers, but it was going to come from the prayers of my own heart.
Woohoo! I went to I had a liberal Jewish upbringing myself. I was really confused, my parents, because they sent me to Catholic nursery school, Unitarian junior high, and Catholic high school.
Oh my.
And I was bar mitzvahed in the works and would go to temple and never felt that connection. The first time I felt the connection was actually in a Navajo Native American drum circle, a ceremony overnight with the coals, with the flames, in which you basically sat in prayer, in meditation, from sunset to sunrise. And that was the first time that I got a taste, and all these years in temple, the first time that I got a taste that there's something more there.
Interesting now, I'm a 55-year-old person, and I go and I visit my mom regularly in South Florida, and she's 92. I always try to go with a Friday night so we can go to temple together. And I sit there in the service and I cry through the entire service.
Oh, man.
I feel so touched by everything that's happening and by the Hebrew prayers from my youth that at the time I couldn't connect to. But now, through an adult spiritual journey, I can come back and feel deeply into the sacredness and intent that's there in the service.
I couldn't agree more. So if we take you over to Sri Lanka, India, and Nepal, what did you start to connect? What did you start to experience? Maybe you had gotten a taste of meditation and now you were like on a mission.
Yeah, I really wanted to discover at essence, what does it mean to be alive? And what in our experience is deathless? Is there something? Is there some aspect of human experience that transcends birth and death? And I wanted to know that. I wanted to know that not because I read about it in a book, because a great mystic told me. I wanted to know it with 100% confidence. And for me, the practice of meditation was my own gateway into that type of knowing and resting in, you could say, eternity or a sense of timeless, boundless being. And so I fell in love with the practice of meditation. I was originally trained in a Vipassana style of meditation taught by Goenka, Sri Goenka, who's a Burmese meditation master. And I went through these 10-day boot camp meditation retreats where you wake up at 5 a.m., you go to sleep at 10 p.m., and you meditate all day in what's known as noble silence. And I just fell in love with the practice in that type of intensive training environment.
I've meditated a lot, but I've never dove that deep on a daily basis. After a 10-day retreat, what was, it's funny to say on your mind because the mind is finally giving up at that point. Maybe what was in your heart?
Well, the interesting thing, and without judgment, I'll say this, is at a certain point I left my second 10-day retreat, went back out into the world, and within hours checked myself back into another 10-day retreat because I couldn't really handle being out in the world. And so there was such a huge contrast between the noise and the vulgarity, if you will, and violence of the world at large, the way I experienced violence just in terms of the speed that people were moving at. And in a way, I became unfit for public life. And I did 4 of these 10-day retreats in a very short period of time. And, I was a young person. I was 21 years old. And on the one hand, this quest was so important, but it also effed me up in a few ways. I came out and I didn't think there was a reason to speak. I thought that most people spoke in order to fill space because they were uncomfortable with empty space. And I wasn't uncomfortable with empty space. In fact, I preferred it. So I wasn't talking. Okay, this was of great concern to my parents when I returned from my travels in Asia. This was, I was called Big Mouth when I was a little kid. No one could shut me up. And now I would just be sitting there without saying a word. What happened to our daughter? On top of that, while I continued in my travels in India before I came back, I didn't really feel a need to eat either. I felt that eating was kind of a gross imposition on the peace that I had discovered. And so that was how I ended up weighing 90 pounds. I'd also developed hepatitis being in India and eating street food. And basically my parents, when I didn't call home on my 21st birthday because I was in a clinic in a small town in India, immediately called the American consulate, said, "Find our daughter, bring her home." And I came back home at that point. And it was a real period then of integrating and becoming a human being that could function in the world.
It's impressive that you integrated so rapidly, in a sense. If you don't mind me asking, did your father pass away during this integration process?
Yeah. So I came back, and within months of my return, my father passed away. And he was 63 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point in time, you can say I integrated quickly. It was a pretty difficult time for me as a 21-year-old. So I had no idea what I was going to do with myself. I couldn't return to academia, even though I loved learning as much as I loved meditation. I mean, those were like my great loves, learning new things and meditating. So I loved this so much, but I didn't want an academic degree because the type of learning that I was interested in was experiential learning. Mm-hmm. And at that time, especially in academia, you weren't really supposed to write about your own inner discoveries. You were supposed to study the great works of other people and write about their discoveries. And that wasn't of interest to me. So I was lost. I was lost and confused. There was one thing that I had that was a string that was meaningful for me, which was that I started an interview program where I could talk to spiritual teachers. And that was at KGNU, Boulder County Community Radio, mm-hmm. and my volunteer type thing. And my goal was to talk to different kinds of spiritual teachers that were traveling through Boulder, Colorado, so that I could get some insight into what happened to me, and also to continue the learning that I didn't feel I could get in an academic setting. So when my father died, I had this volunteer radio show that was important to me. I inherited a small amount of money, around $50,000 upon his death. And one of the guests that I was interviewing, I said, look, I have this money. We were preparing for the show, and I knew he was a very successful Boulder entrepreneur. And I thought, well, I'll talk to him about this money I've inherited that I don't know what to do with. And he said to me, Tammy, why don't you put that money into yourself? And I was like, that is a really wild, terrific, unbelievably inspiring, great idea. If only me and myself knew what to do. Like, here I am. I have no idea. I have no idea where I would put that money. Like, what does that mean? And he just looked at me and he said, you actually know what you want to do. I believe you know what you want to do. Come back in 3 days and we'll talk about it. And that was a moment then of, you could call it grace. You could call it the hand of the universe coming down, or the work of the angels. I don't really know what to call it. You could call it the destiny of my soul. But I walked out of his office and I had a very strange experience. Yeah. And I've shared this a lot, and it's true. It was a strange experience. I walked out, and as I left his office, I suddenly felt like I wasn't quite walking on the ground, which was weird. I was like, why am I not walking on the ground? That's weird. And then I heard an audible interior voice. Mm-hmm. And, I just thought it was myself talking to myself. And that voice said, disseminate spiritual wisdom. And then I felt myself go kind of kerplunk and start walking on the ground again. And I started thinking about how I was going to do that.
It's interesting how there was such a not momentary isn't the right word, such a shift. One moment, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then the next moment, and I've had a couple of these switches in my life, it's like, all right, now how are we going to do this?
Yeah, I think there were two things that had very importantly, or three really, seeded that moment that seemed out of nowhere, miraculous intervention, whatever you want to call it. So one is that I'd been praying really hard. And I'd been saying a prayer, God, I'm willing to do your work. Please show me what it is. And I'd been saying that prayer over and over and over and over and over again. And I think that created a certain fertility, if you will, in my being. The second thing is that the gentleman I was talking to believed in me. He himself said, you know what you want to do. And I think that's the role of the mentor. That's the role of giving somebody permission. And then, there was a third element, and at the moment, I can't remember what it was that occurred to me that I thought was an important part
I know.
of seeding that. Yeah.
I know that you were doing a practice called Felt Sense by
Oh,
Eugene
yeah.
Gendlin.
Hey, you know more about me than I do. That's cool. Yeah, that was the third thing, which is I'd been reading a book by a psychotherapist, Eugene Gendlin, called Focusing. And part of it was to pay attention to how your body feels at any given moment. And that through that paying attention, you can dialogue with the wisdom of your body. And so I was attuned physically. So when I felt this physical shift happen as I left the office, I had been practicing attuning and I knew something was going on, and that it was the felt sense that I could tune into, and a certain kind of tingling. There's a certain kind of inner knowing that I had started really investigating. Oh, that's when I need to pay attention. When that happens, when that interior somatic knowing gets turned on.
Awesome. When we started this show, it came out of, we were actually having to do with mindfulness. We were making a mindfulness and a running program at the time. And we ended up working with a gentleman who I believe you know, Richard Taubinger. And we were developing a program, and he said, go out and do some interviews for your program. And I did one interview after the next, after the next, after the next. I was supposed to do about 4 interviews. I stopped it. I think my wife, who was editing, was at this point beside herself saying, stop, dear Lord, stop, when I hit 44 interviews. And I'm like, this is better than candy. This feels so great. I get to focus on my practice. I get to speak with other people. And I get to do something that brings me great joy. And it sounds like you had linked up with something similar and had this felt sense inside of you of, wow, this feels good. This may even feel great.
Well, and I think this phrase, disseminate spiritual wisdom, as I said, after I heard the phrase, I started thinking about it. And I thought how in my own life, books by Hermann Hesse, Alan Watts, Rainer Maria Rilke, those were probably the 3 biggest authors when I was a teenager for me. Those books were like lifelines for my life. They were what kept me on the planet, really. And I had the thought, if those gentlemen could suffer, really, in similar ways that I had suffered, and turn their suffering into beautiful poetry and beautiful writing and storytelling that could lift other people up, what could be more valuable than putting those kinds of great teachings out into the world and throwing those lifelines out to other people? And that's what I want to do. I want to throw lifelines out to other people who have the kind of existential questioning bent that I do.
Woo! So how did you start? What was your 2-year experiment?
Right. So after this realization, with my $50,000, I said, okay, I'm going to attempt to employ myself, disseminating spiritual wisdom. And at the end of 2 years, if it doesn't work, I'll go get a job. And going and getting a job isn't a particularly worse situation than I would be if I went and tried to go get a job and put the $50,000 in the bank. And this money just came to me as a gift. Let's give it a go. And originally I thought I'll work with the audio medium. And because I had a radio show and people were already requesting copies of my radio show, and I had a very, very little cottage business, meaning I had a little dubbing deck, and I would make 4, 5, 6 cassettes each week for people who wanted to pay $10 a cassette. I was like, oh, I'll expand on that. And I bought some more gear and went out to conferences and workshops that were talking about spiritual transformation and personal transformation. And I recorded those workshops and then bought some high-speed cassette duplication equipment, made copies, sold them to people at the event, gave the workshop leaders a submaster of what happened that they could use. And there you know, in a few years, Sounds True had an archive of several hundred mastered recordings from workshops that we edited. And we started the Sounds True catalog. We packaged these cassettes and started selling them in bookstores, and Sounds True was born.
Woohoo! How did you come up with the name Sounds True, which has, to me, many different meanings to it?
Sure. Well, originally, the name that I thought of for the company, and thank God it didn't happen that this name came into being, was Crystal Sound. Mm-hmm. And at the time, this is the mid-1980s, I liked crystals. I would sit with a crystal in my hand. I thought, a crystal. Oh, you have one with you. Okay. I thought, a crystal contains all of this intelligence of the mineral kingdom, and every single cassette program that we put out will be like a crystal. Mm-hmm. Someone was coming from a rainbow gathering. They created a logo for the company, which was a crystal with sound waves. We still have it hanging in our kitchen 33 years later, their stained glass version of this original logo. But the good news was that when I tried to register the name Crystal Sound, there was a mobile DJ unit in Boulder, Colorado that was already using that name, and we couldn't use it. And I was devastated. I was like, wow, this is the vision of the business, Crystal Sound. What am I going to do? And I was writing a letter to that same Buddhist professor that I had met in Sri Lanka and explaining to him what I was going to do with my life, start this business to disseminate spiritual wisdom. And as I was writing the letter, I can't remember the exact sentence, but I was saying, here's the goal. I want to put out ideas that sound true or something like that. And in writing him the letter, this name occurred to me and it stuck.
Woo! Sounds true. What is the mission? And you have, if I understand right, you have multiple bottom lines. It's not just one thing at this point.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, we have come up with a new tagline for the company. Yeah. I'm going to tell it to you right now, Michael, and we're launching it publicly this year, which is Sounds True, Waking Up the World. And that's really our goal. That's really our mission. Really, our mission is to make spiritual awakening, which is the recognition of our inherent interdependence as human beings, interdependent with each other, with all of life, mm-hmm. and our open-heartedness. So these are the two aspects in Buddhist teaching. These are thought of as the two wings of the teaching. The wing of discovering that there is no separate self, mm-hmm. and the wing of compassion and open-heartedness. And this is what spiritual awakening is, when we have this overwhelming explosion of our hearts and opening of our minds to recognize both our interdependence and how our love actually is big enough. It's the heart of a lion. It includes absolutely all of life. So that's what we're doing. Sounds true. We're waking up the world. And we have three bottom lines to accomplish this. Mm-hmm. One is fulfilling our mission, which means we're not going to publish material that helps people become better separate selves without this recognition, humbly, of our responsibility to all of life. So we're always going to be true to our mission. Then secondly, we're going to be true to what we call the relationship bottom line, which is how we relate not just to each other as fellow employees. We have 125 people or so who work at Sounds True now, but also how we relate to our authors, our customers, how we relate to future generations, how we relate to our shareholders, how we relate to our vendors, how we relate moment to moment. So that has to do with the culture we built here at Sounds True, a culture of love, of kindness, and of personal growth, committing every day to work on what is our own growing edge as an individual, and how can we use our work life to grow ourselves and support the other people on our team and their personal growth. So that's our second bottom line. And then our third bottom line is, you guessed it, cash flow. We need to generate positive cash as a business. Interestingly, that's the bottom line that's the most negotiable. We can find our way and work with less cash or more cash. More cash is better because we can pay people better and we can do more. We can accomplish more. We can have a better infrastructure. We can invest more in our distribution. At the same time, we've had years where we've had a lot less cash, and we figured that out as well. So that's our third bottom line. And we're always trying to manage to all three simultaneously. And there's no reason you can't and that we can't.
Woohoo! What does it mean to be open-hearted, and would you consider yourself an open-hearted leader?
Well, I certainly aspire to be. I think one of the things about being open-hearted is recognizing when your heart's closed. And that's an important part of my process. I often feel my heart closed. And what I mean by that is I feel some part of it that hurts, some part of it that's putting up a barrier or a boundary because it hurts. And I don't want to go into that pain, quite honestly. I don't. It hurts. It's actually physical pain. Going into it, it's kind of like saying, hi, could you please break my arm, please? I mean, it hurts. And I recognize when I don't want to go into it. And I go into it anyway. Sometimes I need help. Sometimes I need the help of a guide or mentor to do that work because their loving presence gives me the space and confidence to do it because I know I'm accompanied in it. But as a person, I'm really committed to that. I'm really committed to the journey of continuing to discover where my heart is shut down and opening it further and further and further.
Beautiful. So when you've built a company from yourself to 125 people, when there are these tug of wars, kind of a head versus heart, you're going into a felt sense place, you're sensing inside of you. How are you navigating those waters?
Well, first of all, I value head information and heart information and intuitive information. And one of the things I'm committed is to looking at all of it.
Yeah.
So intuition, to be honest with you, I'm very guided and move a lot just intuitively. I just have a sense like, go for that. Let's just go for that. And I think of that as a gut kind of knowing. It's just like, and a lot of business people have a gut sense about things. If you talk to like stock traders or people like that, they've got this gut and they just kind of know it or smell it or feel it. And you go with your gut. Okay, so there's a gut knowing. And, often if my gut's uncomfortable, I really have to pause and examine what's going on. But then, as you mentioned, there's this heart knowing, a heart feeling. And I honor what that says too. But there's also mental analysis and a calculator and data and historical data and financial projections. And I'm very interested in that information as well. And there's no problem holding all of these multiple perspectives, sitting with it, and then coming to a clear-minded sense of what the right thing to do is.
Woohoo! What's it mean on that line? And I can hear you're bouncing ideas. You're bouncing ideas off of yourself. You're bouncing ideas off of others. You mentioned about having somebody to help you hold space as you dive into, you lean into the pain. What's it mean to be a feedback junkie?
Well, when I mentioned that one of our values in our relationship bottom line is personal growth, I think one of the really interesting things is how do people grow? How do you grow? How do you actually grow? And one of the curious things is that other people can see us so much better than we can see ourselves. But one of the things I want as a person is to see myself clearly. It's hard. It's hard to do. Even if, I don't spend that much time in front of a mirror. Even if you did, you couldn't see yourself very clearly. But other people do see us clearly. So what can we learn from their perceptions? One of the things that I'm very interested in is this idea of a deliberately developmental organization. And this is a body of work that has been written about by Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy. And what they talk about is that the more individuals grow in an organization, the more the business can grow, that they're intimately tied together. So a lot of people, their business stops growing. And really the reason is them. They're the reason. If you really get down to it, you really want to look at it. There's some aspect, whether it's because they're too controlling or they're too afraid or, I don't know what it is, but they're the obstacle. And I never want to be the obstacle of sounds true fulfilling its mission to wake up the world. So how do I get out of the way? Well, the only way is if I listen to feedback from people and they say, Tammy, I think on this point, you're being stubborn, or you're only looking at it from one way, or etc. And so I learn the most through feedback, and I love to get it. And even sometimes, at first I'm not open to it. I don't want to hear it. But give me a good night to sleep on it, and I'll come back around and say thank you.
I like that. I know with Jessica, my wife, she's a producer as well. There are times where she'll say things, and my gut reaction, which I've worked on quite a bit, is say no. And now, if I can't catch myself in the moment of saying no, I will step back, and all it'll do is take a minute or two, and I'll go, all right, let me hear it.
Yeah.
So do you have a process of self-inquiry that you do?
Well, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of A.H. Almaas. Mm-hmm. So he's the founder of the Diamond Approach.
Yeah.
And in the Diamond Approach, which is a contemporary spiritual path, they've trained hundreds of teachers worldwide and thousands of students. He's written 20 some odd books. In the Diamond Approach, inquiry is the central method of practice. So not necessarily meditation, although meditation is an element of the work that they do, but their central core practice is inquiry. And I have found this approach incredibly valuable. And basically, you inquire into whatever you're experiencing in the moment, whatever you're experiencing in the moment. So if it's the closed-heartedness I described before, or ecstatic flows that are happening when you're sitting drinking your tea, or despair in listening to the news, or absolutely anything, you go through a process of wanting to understand, what is this? Why is it here? What's it wanting me to know? What's deeper and underneath it? Go into whatever you're experiencing in the moment. And what's wonderful about this is it makes every single one of our experiences sacred. Absolutely everything that's happening, whether it's painful or blissful, is the sacred way that the universe is showing up in our felt sense in the moment.
How have you cultivated the awareness to bring the pause to that moment to say, let me dive into that?
I enjoy it. So it's not so much some kind of I have to set my alarm or, have a reminder. I mean, it's relishing life to me. And so it's kind of like asking somebody, how have you blah, blah to eat? Well, you're hungry, you do it. So it feels very organic in my experience.
Beautiful. I know I have a process that we teach in automatic writing, and for myself, spending an hour and a half each morning in inquiry, I say, is my oxygen. And I do it throughout the day, but having that time to step back and get out of the bubble of me and start asking those important questions means everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So before we really dive into mindfulness, please forgive me, I've got to ask, you have an amazing wife from what I've met. From what I understand, how did you guys meet?
Okay, now we're talking about something that's this is going to make me shine, super shine. Well, we met on Cortez Island at a retreat center called Hollyhock.
Yeah.
Her name's Julie Kramer. She's Canadian. And I was 39 years old. She was 27. And basically, on her side, it was a type of love at first sight.
Yeah.
And she saw me, and soon after walked up to me and said, I find you absolutely stunning. And I was sort of taken aback. Here's this gorgeous 27-year-old young woman. And I was like, let's talk. And she's like, are you single? And I said, I am. And she said, I'm not, but I'm going to break up with my boyfriend and spend the rest of my life with you. And of course, I was like, what? What's going on? Like, what is going on with this person who would say something like this? You don't even know me. But anyway, that happened 17 years ago. And we are tremendously happy together. And she is a huge gift in my life. She had never been with a woman before, never even kissed a woman. So this is, this is pretty remarkable, true story.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Did you have guards up, walls up, or you
Yeah, whatever. I was like, look, I would like to have an intimate experience with this woman. I'd like to have sex with this woman. That's clear. That is absolutely clear to me. In terms of spending our life together, who knows? Mm-hmm. I want to get to know her, and I don't even know if I mean, look, come on, one step at a time here. On top of that, I was very afraid that she was some type of impulsive, she made this declaration to me without knowing me. Would she at any moment meet some attractive man? She'd never even been with a woman before and just decide to leave me like she'd left her previous boyfriend. So, it took a while for me. I would say it wasn't until we were together for about 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I remember this evening because I was sharing some of my fears about, how the other shoe was going to drop and she was going to leave me. And how could I really totally trust and invest in the relationship? And we were on vacation together, and we were in this vacation rental in Telluride, and she screamed at the top of her lungs, when are you going to get it that I'm in love with you? And it kind of broke my trance in a way. And I started thinking, oh my God, I think this woman actually really wants to be with me, wants to spend her life. I think she actually wants to spend her life with me. I think she really loves me. For reasons, like soul reasons, not, oh my God. And then I started relaxing and enjoying the relationship.
Woohoo! Would you say she's been one of your greatest teachers?
Oh my. I mean, greatest teacher, greatest friend, greatest pain in the greatest co-parent of our little dog family, greatest inspiration, greatest heart balm. She's a goddess. And as a goddess, she brings an incredible energy of love, compassion, support, and also intensity and at times destruction and tearing away of things that aren't true. And she's also just a person in her own development and growth process that I'm there to support and care for and be a friend to. So it's everything.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So let's switch gears from there. Thank you so much for sharing. Let's talk about mindfulness. And what does mindfulness mean to you?
Sure. Well, the definition that I think is accepted by a lot of people, because the term is used so often in so many different ways that it's practically become meaningless. But Jon Kabat-Zinn introduced a definition into the culture that I think is a touchstone for many people, which is to be in the present moment, paying attention in a non-judgmental way. So when people say, I'm going to go on a mindful run, or I'm going to garden mindfully, or I'm going to be mindful at work, I do think that's what they mean. I'm going to bring attentiveness to the present moment in a non-judgmental way. Now, if we get a little more technical, for me, I was trained. How do you do that? How do you actually do what I just described?
Yeah.
And I was trained by bringing to becoming mindful two aspects of training. One is concentration, and the other is awareness or insight. And so the first way that I trained, and I think this is so important, is do we know how to calm that part of our mind that's go, 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 going all the time?
Yeah.
Can we calm it down? Can we create some space in our experience? Can we stop believing that we are that thinking process? We're so invested in our thoughts. We actually think that we're a little thinker inside, like a little mini me inside our brain thinking. So first thing is to concentrate. And to learn to concentrate is incredibly valuable. And you can pick all kinds of objects of concentration, the breath, body sensation, and we tether our mind to that sense object so that our mind starts to calm down. So I think developing concentration is an incredibly important skill in becoming mindful. And sometimes people get confused. They think concentration is mindfulness. And I just want to point that out. It's not. It is a technique that helps us build this bigger way of being mindful in the world. Okay, the second part, once we've calmed our mind, can we actually just open and rest in the space of being that is so much bigger than any mental process? Then we can rest. We can rest in a space in which thoughts arise, physical sensations arise. There's a visual input into our experience, auditory input. And the thinking process just becomes like another sensory input. There's visual things going on, there are thoughts going on, there are feelings in the body, and we actually learn how to rest as being or rest in awareness. And the interesting thing is the more we can sit and rest in that way, the more spontaneous insight comes into us. We become illuminated. To use your shining word, we start to shine. And we start to shine from the inside out because we become actually a field of presence. We become that. So to me, mindfulness is knowing how to concentrate and disidentify from the thinking mind by making it an object and then opening up to this big space of awareness.
Woohoo! That is probably the most luminous description I think I have ever heard. So how do we start to bring that into our daily lives?
Well, first of all, I think you have to get trained. I mean, I think a lot of people, they don't bother. And you know, do you have to go to a 10-day boot camp the way I was trained? I'd venture that it's a very good way to start. And I actually have some level of reticence when I see how mindfulness has come into the culture and I see people are trying to learn it just from a book, even though Soundstru's published a lot of great books, just from an audio program, even though there are a lot of great audio programs, or from a 5-minute-a-day app or anything like that. There's a way, in my experience, that if you can have an immersion of some kind, maybe it's just a weekend retreat, but something, because it takes a certain amount of depth and time to recognize that field of awareness in which thoughts are arising and to disidentify from thinking. It's not that easy. It really isn't. We've been habituated to think like a runaway train for decades, most of us. And so I think it's great to start with some kind of immersion training. And I think without training, I think we fool ourselves into what mindfulness is, so that we have moments of being present, but in that moment of being present, there's an I that's being present. So there's still a separation. There's still a sense of solid self operating. There's still a sense of subject-object division. And I don't want to get too complex here, but really, when we are trained in mindfulness and we know what it means to be mindful in our experience, that division dissolves. And so I want to help people get into the deep end of the pool by beginning with some kind of immersion training.
I love that. It makes me think of Anders Ericsson, who talks about, he's the originator of the 10,000 hour rule that Malcolm Gladwell kind of used in his own way. But he talks about how deliberate practice is required for expertise, meaning you can practice a free throw 1,000 times the wrong way, and you're still learning how to make a bad shot. Versus if you get somebody to coach you and to teach you and start to show you the way, then you have that feedback and know what it feels like and what it senses like to begin. On that note, this gets into the question of, it really seems to me that mindfulness has been kidnapped lately. It's been hijacked and tried to be taken away from that larger sense. And that larger sense is even the word important falls radically short, doesn't it?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm happy that mindfulness has been kidnapped and is entering the culture at large. I think that's wonderful. I'd say the same thing about yoga, meaning anything that gets people started. Wonderful. So even though I said that about, the 5 minute a day or books, I also think they're just gateways and great. Let's go. Let's get started. But let's not forget where those gateways lead. And for people, someone like me who spent a lot of time being trained, I want to make sure to take this opportunity as I'm talking to you and I'm talking to all of your audience to point out that deep end of the pool. Because what I think is that when people get a taste, this is something I deeply believe as a person, and it comes into Sounds True's mission of waking up the world. I believe that we are wired as human beings for enlightenment. I believe that. I believe it is part of who we are as an aspect of divinity, as an expression of divinity. It is in us. It is our own inner illumination. And that once we get a taste, I got a taste when I read the book Siddhartha at 16, and Hermann Hesse described what it was like for Siddhartha to sit and listen to the sound of the river. And when he heard the sound of the river, how he heard all of life in the river. Just reading those 3 pages about the river gave me a taste of something. And the rest of my life became oriented around that first taste. So even if somebody has some kidnapped taste and they're sitting there and they're counting their breaths, okay, great. A beginning concentration practice. Wonderful. I'm on breath 8. I'm on breath 9. I'm going to count to 10. And somewhere in there, between breath 9 and 10, they fall into a huge open space. And they feel like they're floating in eternity. And breath number 10, they never count 10. And instead they dissolve. And they have a sense of being way beyond their body and mind in that moment at breath 9.5. Oh my God. And I think we're going to find so much accidental first tastes because of the kidnapping of mindfulness. So yes, let's go for it.
Woohoo! From a more, it's strange to bring us from enlightenment to the practical side of things, but why not practical applications of why? Why in this day and age do we want to be more present, more, to use that term, mindful, or to start diving into the practice?
Okay, well, first of all, the same reason we would want to in any day and age. As human beings, we long for fulfillment. We long for the fulfillment of our reason for being alive. We want to know something like total satisfaction, sufficiency, rest, completion, love. You can give a lot of different words to it, but human beings long for that sense of ultimate belonging here as divinity itself expressing itself in a human form. Without that, we are not going to ever rest. And we know that the things we're consuming don't do it. We know our outer accomplishments don't do it. We know even that our partnerships don't do it. It's an interior sense of total sufficiency. So I think that's something human beings need in any age. Now, in this age that we're in, there are all these cultural forces that are working against us. They're working against us because they're promising us all these shiny objects on the outside, and maybe we believe it because we were raised in competitive academic environments that taught us not that we were interdependent with everybody, but that we were supposed to be better than other people. And if we weren't better, we would never be satisfied. So we're always looking at being one up or feeling one down instead of feeling our deep inner connection. And so we have so many things working against us: the speed of life, the busyness, the technology that's interrupting us and turning us into, like rats in a cage that are being shocked every other moment while our phone's dinging, etc. And so there's all of these factors working against us, which is why we have to work extra hard at discovering the natural space and the natural open-heartedness in our being. I think in some ways it's easier now, and in other ways it's harder. It's easier now because there are programs like this, and because there's the work of Sounds True and lots of other outlets where this information is so readily available. And it's so easy to get actually very high quality teaching. That makes it easier. I don't have to walk 500 miles to find, someone sitting in a cave somewhere who can give me some teachings. That's great. But it's also harder because we're more disconnected from the natural flow of life. We're not going to sleep staring at the moon. We're not touching the earth with our bare feet. So we're out of connection with the natural world, and that makes it a lot harder. So we have to work harder.
I like that you use that word connected there, because when I think of mindfulness, I'm also thinking of our communities, because as we start to become more present with ourselves, we start to become more present with each other as well.
Yes, I think that's true. I think it's actually impossible, and of course that's logical, to be really connected with somebody else if you're not there. If you're not there, if you're not connected with yourself, if you're not there, then they don't have anyone to connect with, and you're not there to feel their love and appreciation.
For some reason, that almost wants me to bring me to tears, the thought of how plugged in and disconnected we are today.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's pick it back up from there. Let's talk about your mindfulness certification program. Where did this come from?
Sure. Well, Sounds True works with many of the leading meditation teachers of our time. And two of those teachers are Jack Kornfield and Tara Brach. And many of your listeners might be familiar with both of these really beloved meditation teachers. And Jack and Tara decided to team up, and their intention was to create a teacher training program that could be delivered wholly online and would reach people all over the world who wanted to be trained in a deep and rigorous way to become mindfulness meditation teachers that could then go back into their community, whether those communities are in Uganda or in a nonprofit environment or a for-profit environment or a yoga studio. And when I heard about their vision for this mindfulness meditation teacher certification program, I said Sounds True would be an ideal partner, and I would love to partner with you on this. And so that's how the program was born. We began by filming over 100 hours of teaching from Jack and Tara, along with some guest teachers, Joanna Macy, Eckhart Tolle, Deepak Chopra. And this combination of video teaching combined with an online mentorship component, which is really key, so that people meet in a small group monthly and then also individually with their mentor. You don't become certified, and the certification for this program is coming from the Greater Good Science Center. You don't become certified until you've passed a practicum where you're videotaped teaching to other people and your mentor reviews that footage. And so really this is, as I said, a rigorous program, 2 years. And at the end, you then have that torch where you can carry the light of the practice back into your community and teach other people.
Woohoo! Not that you can point it to one or two things, but what excites you? This sounds brilliant. What excites you most about it?
Quite honestly, what excites me personally the most is that we have a very engaged scholarship program where we'll be able to offer scholarships to this program to people all over the world. And when I think of some of the letters we've gotten from people from Africa and other places who are so excited to become trained mindfulness teachers, I'm thrilled. I think this is part of the fulfillment of waking up the world, is to have people who are inspired, who can go through a training like this and can bring this back on the ground to their communities.
How do you think it'll help their communities?
Yeah. Well, as I said, that process of learning first to concentrate and disidentify from our thinking mind, that's the beginning of discovering the full, rich sense of being that we are. And once that discovery starts, it begins to have a life of its own. We start to see how presence starts to change us. It starts to infiltrate us. It starts to communicate to us what's needed from us. And we become servants of light on purpose in the world. And I think that will have huge changes.
Woohoo! So on that note, where can people go to find out about the program and to find more?
Just come visit us at soundstrue.com.
Awesome. And if you didn't catch, if you don't remember soundstrue.com, come on over to inspirenationshow.com. We'll get you over to soundstrue.com. How important would you say is self-acceptance to you?
Yeah, I think it's super, 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 super. So we can underline the super as many times as we want. Important. And, really that came to me because at a certain point I started teaching meditation. Mm-hmm. And I studied within a Tibetan Buddhist tradition with a teacher named Reggie Ray. And he taught a whole series of practices called meditating with the body that were really important to me in my own growth and development. And he asked me to teach at a certain point. And in teaching meditating with the body and having private one-on-one interviews with students, I noticed that the number one thing that kept people from really fully being able to engage the practice was that they judged themselves. They judged themselves for not being as good a practitioner as the person sitting next to themselves. They judged themselves because their hearts were closed or because their hearts were too open and they were too sensitive. They judged themselves for, I could go on, being too fat, being too thin, being too this, being too that. And I was like, oh my God, this is the biggest thing that gets people frozen. If the practice itself is connecting to a river of experience that is continually flowing and changing and dynamic and self-knowing and informing of us, if that's what actually life is this swift moving river, the thing that pulls the emergency brake and freezes us and gets us stuck, is that we don't accept ourselves. We don't accept how weird and unusual we are. We don't accept how we don't go along with the crowd. We don't accept our unique soul function, which doesn't look like anybody else, and we're comparing ourselves to this person or that person. We don't accept our body. We don't accept the foods we like, on and on and on. And so I made this commitment to not just help other people, but also help myself, because I could see how this operated in me and that I didn't accept certain aspects of my own very unusual wiring as a person and how that was an obstacle in my own life. So, as you probably know, Michael, I conducted a series of at first 23 interviews with teachers on how can we learn to accept ourselves more. And it became an anthology, a book called The Self-Acceptance Project. And I did a follow-up series with 30 more interviews.
So cool.
And I learned so much. And I think it's super useful no matter where you are, because if we can't accept ourselves, we can't actually dive deep into what's really genuinely happening. We will get pushed off, we'll reflect off because of that judgment.
So what's your commitment that you made to yourself, or what do we get to understand to start to make a commitment to ourselves so that we can begin to accept ourselves more?
Yeah, I mean, in this moment, there are two key things. One, you are wholly unique. There's no one else like you. You know, people call this the special snowflakes idea. And, but if you really get that, that's a huge form of self-acceptance, because you'll stop comparing yourself to anyone, to a better interviewer, to a guy that works out at the gym, for me, to a more accomplished business person, to a more famous person, to a thinner person, whatever. This is just the universe in this one weird way coming through right now. So that's a big thing to really get, how deeply one of a kind we each are. I think the other thing is that if we can deeply accept ourselves, we'll see that whatever we're experiencing, and it could be something very difficult, could be a sense of meaninglessness, could be envy, it could be resentment, it could be fear, whatever it is, that too is divinity. That too is shining. That is shining, even though it feels like mud. Mm-hmm. It feels like black covering dirt. It feels terrible. If we accept it as life and as the shining divinity underneath, then we get to the shimmering light. And if we don't accept it, if we push it away, then part of us might be shining, but there's another part of us that is all of our hidden away darkness that everybody else can perceive, despite however much we proclaim our light. And so that's another big aspect of self-acceptance. Whatever you're experiencing, it is sacred.
Woohoo! Thank you, thank you, thank you, because what you said right there can literally save lives. Because when we don't accept ourselves, it can take us down a very slippery slope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. So on that note, Jessica, my wife, she always wants me to ask a question for parents and their kids. So from all of the teachers that you've had on Sounds True, what advice would you give parents to help their kids today?
It's a good question. I'm not a parent. So in that sense, it's a difficult question for me to answer. You did, in your introduction, mention my beautiful Raspberry, who's now 2. And we also have another beautiful spoodle, half Cocker Spaniel, half Poodle, named Bula. But I don't think it's fair to compare parenting an animal to parenting children. But the advice I would give to any of us, and I think this includes parents, is we all are called to make huge sacrifices for love. And those sacrifices are the result of the choices that we've made from our heart. And I think we can celebrate sacrifice. Often we resent our sacrifices. I can't stand my sacrifice, and this is so hard. And I think for parents, gosh, it is. It's a lot. I mean, I see it in my friends. It's so demanding. But instead of resenting it, what if we said, oh my God, I sacrifice for love. I sacrifice for love. What a beautiful thing to do. That's a sense, that's deep service for love.
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So just a few brief wrap-up questions. First, what personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
Now, that's a good question. Well, as you can tell, Michael, I'm nowhere near as woohoo as you are. I just don't have it in me.
You just had it going on there.
Woohoo! Woohoo! You can try it.
Woohoo!
Yeah, so I would probably say kissing and dancing.
All right. Particular type of dance.
Freestyle.
I love it, love it, love it. Tammy, this has been so much fun. Oh, we get to do a brief meditation at the end. Before that, any last words of wisdom you want to share with people, Tammy?
Find your woohoo! Whatever it is for you. Whatever that is for you. Even if it's, lying on the ground, face down in the earth, not making a sound. Like, yours doesn't have to look like Michael's. Find your woohoo.
And all I can say, Tammy, is woohoo!
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
I could not resist. Just walked right in there. So, would you mind leading us in a very brief guided meditation of your calling?
Sure. Well, you know how I mentioned in Running Sounds True that there's a gut instinct, there's a heart knowing, and there's also mental illumination. And what we could do right now is to just check in with these 3 subtle centers in the body. And these are actual subtle body configurations. They're known in many traditions. In the Taoist tradition, they're known as the 3 Tantians that live in our body. So we'll start with our belly center. So you can just put your hands on your belly and breathe into your belly. And as you breathe in, you can actually feel your belly expand, not just in the front, but to the sides and the back. It's almost like you're expanding a balloon, that your belly is shaped like a balloon. And with your inhale, you can feel the balloon getting big, not just in the front, but in the back and the sides, and even down all the way to the pelvic floor. A lot of times our belly is tight and constricted, and opening this belly center helps us open this visceral knowing in us. So let your breath circulate down in your belly, expanding on the inhale. And then the balloon deflates a bit on the exhale. And then we can move to our heart center. And again, if it's comfortable for you, you can place your hands on your heart. And now breathing into this whole chamber in the chest. This can sometimes be an area it's sensitive. It's so sensitive. Do we actually have the courage to breathe into this part of our body? And again, as you breathe into your heart, feel it all the way to the back of the heart and to the sides. Sometimes the back of our heart, we can feel like there's a metal plate back there. You can breathe in and just soften and let yourself touch into the sensitivity of your own heart center. Sensitive people can feel the field of the heart reaching out many, 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 many feet in all directions. So see if you can let yourself feel the expanse of your heart. And then we'll move into the center at the third eye and into the center of the head. You can just breathe in right through your third eye. The breath that's coming in through your nostrils, pouring back into the center of your head. And let the center of your head be the source of illumination, of light in you. Just breathing right into the center of the head, and again letting it expand in the center of the head as if it doesn't know the constraints of the cranium. That center light in the head is even bigger than your head. Let the energy that comes in through your third eye and through your nose just go right into that inner source of illumination in the center. And then finally, we'll connect all three centers. So you can breathe from a space from infinitely below you. This is the central channel line in the body. And as you breathe in, energy comes up from below, through the belly center, through the heart center, through the center of the head, and out the top of the head. So it's as if we're breathing from way down below on the inhale. The energy streams up into our body like a river of light through our belly, heart, and head. And we are a human fountain of light that starts from below on the inhale, comes all the way up, and on the exhale, there's a fountainous flow of shimmering light. Thank you, Michael, for this chance to share with you. Thank you.
Woohoo! Thank you so much, Tammy. This has been beautiful. And that meditation, just want to rest in that space. That felt awesome. Thank you so much, Tammy.
Thank you for your good work. Thank you.
So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, dive into your heart today, and consider becoming Mindful Teacher Certification today. Say that, that's a tongue twister. And shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Tammy. In
Thanks, Michael.
baseball vernacular, and it's out of there.
All right, we're bases loaded?
Absolutely, you just hit a grand slam.
That's what I like to hear. Woohoo! Thank you, sweetheart.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!